My loves, welcome back to the Fallon Frequency Podcast, your space for that alignment, expansion, and of course, unstoppable energy. I am your host, Fallon, and I'm so very excited to have you here today. Today, I want to talk about more. More. I have become so very fascinated with this word and every sense of it, okay? Like more everything, more love, more life, more wealth, more freedom, more support, more adventure, more travel, more aliveness, more impact, just more life all around. And before I'm sure some of you that hear this and think this is going to be a conversation about never being satisfied, about always trying to tick the next box or hit the next goal. No, that is not at all what this conversation is about. You probably know me better than that if you're hearing this episode. I am obsessed with gratitude. I love gratitude. I think gratitude's such a, it puts you back in that higher frequency. It's one of the easiest ways to reconnect, get out of yourself, be grateful for where you are, be happy for where you are in this very present moment, receiving my own life and looking around and thinking like, yes, this is it. I get to be here. I get to experience this. But I also don't believe gratitude requires stagnation. Okay? I don't believe loving your life means you stop desiring more. I don't believe appreciating means you have to pretend that there's something else inside you saying that you don't actually want more. I mean, it's actually our soul's mission. It's the evolution. We came here to transform and change and challenge ourselves. And in order to do that, we have to crave more, right? So I think it's a very healthy thing to have these desires and crave more. I don't think desires are things that you just think about either. You recognize them, you feel them in your body. Maybe you can't even completely explain how you're going to get there or where you're even going. Maybe you don't have a whole plan, mapped out, but when you have a desire, it's like you've energetically already touched it. You get this like flash. You see yourself standing in a room or opening your account to a certain number, or seeing the business that you want to build, or the loving relationship that you want to be in, or this gorgeous house that you've imagined, or even writing your first novel with, your book name, like your name on it, right? A plane ticket to an exotic place, a stage with thousands of people, an adventure that you just crave in your soul. Some people crave adventure, myself being one of them. The version of your Tuesday morning where this isn't like this low-level urgency running underneath everything, right? Your whole body is like, fuck yes, let's go, and that's definitely what I've been discovering for myself. And that's maybe you've experienced parts of you experiencing more, especially if you're running your own business, having a bigger month than you'd usually have, or if you're an adventure girly, having a spontaneous trip, or holding a boundary that you've never held before because you're doing so much inner work, feeling deeply supported, feeling like you're resonating with your people, feeling like your soul tribe is around you, maybe you're making a scary move you've never done before. You've had a week where you woke up and you thought to yourself, my God, this is what it feels like. You've touched more at some point in your life. You can't tell me that you haven't, and it's incredible. But what makes this episode so potent, and why I think this next question is so important, is if we felt these things, right? We felt what it's like to feel more. We felt like what it's like to feel lit up. We felt like what it's like to have that loving relationship, or take that spontaneous trip, or have this, crazy milestone or goal that we hit in our business, right? If we know that it's available and we felt it before, right? Why do we keep going back? Why do we touch our next level, our highest self, and then return to the same old shit? Like, why do we make more money than we've ever made before and immediately start worrying about when the next sale is coming? Why do we finally allow ourselves to receive support, okay? And then grab everything back and say, don't worry, I've got this, And this is a confession, episode of mine. I do this all the time. I love putting myself in bigger spaces. I love expanding. And I caught myself, the other week where I'm like, I deeply craved this room. I deeply craved this support. I had so much resonance, right? And I love the people in it. And then I found myself trying to do all this shit on my own. I found myself not asking the questions because I was at this level of like, I should know this answer. I should know this, thing. I shouldn't ask these questions. But the difference is like, the people there are mirroring back to you, right? It's a reflection of like your blind spot, right? It doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about, but to see it from a different perspective and a different lens is game changing, right? It's like, why do we finally learn how to hold this incredible boundary that we've been working on for years? And then 2 weeks later, we start negotiating if that was the right boundary. Like, if I was too harsh, or maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I should have gone to this thing, right? Why do we experience this spaciousness, this freedom, this openness, and then immediately try to fill the space with things that don't allow us to, feel things, right? We cover it up with all these tasks and these jobs and these to-dos and this busyness, right? I definitely used to do that as well. I was always doing something, always trying to keep going, Why do we feel fantastic, like incredible in our skin and in our body, and then we go straight back to treating exhaustion like it's just part of us? It is who we are. I am one of those people that can run on empty and I thrive off of it. Says no one ever, but they think that. It's like ego, It's like, why do we touch something so extraordinary and then somehow convince ourselves that old standard is normal, right? This is really what I want to talk about today. Today has a lot to do with our standards and what we tolerate, because once we recognize this, once we really understand where we're operating from, we can shift it. But if we don't understand where we're operating from, we cannot move, right? Because we just think we're on our way, I don't think your biggest challenge, let's say your biggest opportunity, I don't even want to say the problem, your biggest stuckness feeling is that you don't know what you want. I don't think you're confused. I don't think there's no clarity there. I don't think that you don't know what you want. You're a woman. You know you want more. Like, if you are evolving on this planet, if you are following your soul's journey, you know that you want more. You want more. You recognize there's more available to you, even if you haven't touched it yet, even if you haven't tapped into it. You know in your soul that it exists. So then the question really becomes, why does your identity currently recognize where you are as normal? What is causing you to stay? What is causing you to stay in this sticky molasses, this non-moving space, when you know what's on the other side, when you know all you have to do is cross over that bridge, when you know all the rainbows and butterflies and all the things that you crave, or the moreness is on the other side of the bridge, but you stay stuck. You can't move your feet. Why is that, right? Now, there is a gap, yes, but you're creating the gap, which is the beauty here, okay? One side is what we consciously desire. One side, we are very aware. We are very in tune with what we want, the fact that we want more. It can be as simple as that, but the other side is really what we've been accustomed to living. We spend so much time working on the desire side, the vision boards, tapping into it, definitely important, journaling and visualizing, your goals and your affirmations, and people have manifestation lists. There's so many beautiful practices and tools, right? And I love all the things. You've got to go with what works for you. But there's another question that I don't think we bring enough attention to, and it really started to kind of get my own gears shifting when I really took a different lens here. What have I normalized? Not what do I actually want? I know what I want. I know I want more. I want so much more, and I won't go into depth in this episode on all the beautiful things that I want and that I see for my future. But what have I normalized? You can consciously desire an extraordinary relationship, a loving relationship, while normalizing inconsistent communication, right? You can desire a wildly profitable business. You can want to be, the top 1% of your niche or whatever it is, but you normalize being underpaid. You normalize things that are not in alignment with that vision, right? You can desire free time while normalizing being available to everyone at every hour, right? You can desire this incredible health, but you normalize waking up exhausted. These aren't aligned. You see how these just aren't meshing together? You can desire this adventure, you can desire this travel, you can desire like going to exotic places and learning new languages and being in different cultures and being spontaneous, but you normalize saying, maybe next year, when I can afford it. You can desire wealth, right? But you normalize this mild panic every time you look at your bank account, okay? Again, incongruent, not lining up. It's like after you have lived inside something long enough, after it has become your new normal, you stop seeing this environment, you stop seeing this way of being, you stop seeing this identity as something that you are tolerating, and you see it as like your reality. This is just how it is, right? This is just how business runs. This is just what I have to do. This is normal for me. Relationships are hard. It's like, women that have one bad relationship or maybe multiple, depending on the energy that's going out there. And then all of a sudden all men are bad. Like, obviously that is not true, but you have made that true for you, right? Money comes and goes. Well, money comes and goes because you believe money comes and goes. So money comes and money goes by your actions, by your identity, by what's running the show. I'm just an anxious person. Nobody's just an anxious person. Okay? I'm just an anxious person is what you have normalized. You have normalized being anxious as part of your identity, as part of your personality, which is not a thing. I'm always busy. You make yourself always busy. I'm bad at receiving. Well, why? You've decided you're bad at receiving. You believe you're bad at receiving. So guess what? You're going to be bad at receiving. It's like that whole, this is just who I am. But is it? I want to challenge you here. Is it just who you are? Or is it something that you have repeated for so fucking long that familiarity started masquerading as truth? Right? Like, those are not the same thing. Familiar does not mean true. Familiar does not mean true. Familiar does not mean permanent. Familiar does not mean aligned. Familiar does not mean that it's written in stone in the cosmos and it can never change. Familiar definitely does not mean worthy of becoming your standard, right? Like, this conversation. Like, this is where I want to get into, okay? The below standard bullshit that we keep tolerating. That's it. We're tolerating it. It's true for us in our reality right now purely because we're tolerating it. We're normalizing some absolute fucking nonsense. It is nonsense. We're normalizing the client who constantly pushes the boundary because that's what's happening. It's not like, oh my God, I only attract this type of person. No, that's what you're putting out there. It's an energetic game always, right? We're normalizing a relationship where we're wondering where we stand. Like, have some authority in your life, We're normalizing checking our bank account with dread. Why? Why are you putting that energy out there, Normalize being exhausted or always being available or, being in a relationship that asks us to shrink that isn't our highest good, We're normalizing businesses where we've built that we secretly don't actually even enjoy running them, right? We're normalizing having this dream life, this more in our life, in our journal, for 5 years, while we continue to say soon, tomorrow, it'll happen someday, I'll just keep visualizing. No, you're tolerating that. Normalizing saying no to what we want before anybody else even gets a chance to. After you've lived in a space long enough, in an environment long enough, you honestly, what happens is your association with it, right? Your relationship with it. You stop realizing that you stop registering it as a choice when it actually is a choice. And it just falls into this folder of that's my life. But no, I say fuck that. No, that is not true. Your tolerance, your current level of tolerance is not proof of what you're capable of having. Okay, it's evidence of what you've become accustomed to having. Do you understand that? Your current level of tolerance, your current reality, where you are right now, where your standards are right now, is not proof of what you're capable of. It is evidence of what you've been accustomed to accepting. Okay? They're very, very different things. Your desire shows me where your soul is pulling you, where you want to go, the direction that you actually want to go in. But your tolerations, where you are, what's happening in your current reality is showing me where your identity is currently living. Okay, and it's such an important distinction, clearly why I had to bring it to this episode. Sometimes you don't need another strategy. There's so many strategies out there, and I think strategy is great. It can support you when you've cleaned up the energy first. You don't need to set a new goal. You don't need another morning routine. You don't need to stop calling something normal you do need to stop calling something normal that your highest self is done with. Your highest self is just done. What are you done tolerating? Maybe like a little less energy into what we're visioning in our dream, and we know our desires. We know we want more. What are we done with? What are we done tolerating, right? And I'm not saying this at all to shame you. Okay, it's not like what have you done right, what have you done wrong with your life? No, absolutely not. I want you to recognize the gap that you're creating. You can't change a baseline if you keep defending that as your reality. You simply cannot. And this is where the old story matters, and it matters so much, okay? You can declare, you can get really energetically backed behind a decision, and declare a completely new future, but you can emotionally still be rehearsing your past all day long. So this is really important to understand. Think about how often we have, by default, revisited something that has happened. Maybe if we go back to relationships, it's a relationship that hurt you, right? Or if you're in business, a launch that flopped, or money that went out as fast as it came in, or a person rejected you in some way, or a moment you felt embarrassed about yourself, you had shame around something, the year where everything just crumbled, right? If you think about that, think about any of those things, it's very uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? Because your body goes back to that feeling. Your body goes back in a response to that emotional feeling that past circumstance creates, right? Your chest tightens, maybe your stomach drops, maybe your jaw clenches, you feel uncomfortable. It's like you re-feel the disappointment all over again. You feel the fear all over again, or the humiliation, or the scarcity mindset, right? And the physical event, the actual event, when you think about it, might have happened 5 years ago. But in that moment, in this present moment, when you think about it, because it's still emotionally charged, you're practicing the emotional state attached to it again. So you're recreating it by emotionally feeling it energetically. And it's almost like it's muscle memory, but it's the wrong fucking kind. It's not the muscle memory that we want to be adding to. We don't want to build that muscle, right? You become extremely practiced at returning to that emotional posture. And then you wonder why the new identity feels unfamiliar. We've spent 10,000 repetitions, repeating things like, I'm not chosen, I'm not worthy. And 20 repetitions rehearsing, I'm worthy, I'm deeply loved, It's like 10,000 repetitions of money is stressful to then 17 repetitions or affirmations saying, I'm so wildly supported, money's abundant. Do you understand? It's like, I have to do everything myself. And then we're confused when receiving feels so very uncomfortable. Your past matters, yes. It may explain exactly why you learned, to put this armor on in the first place, why you learned to protect yourself the way you did. It definitely deserves compassion, right? But listen to me. Your past can explain your default. It does not get to dictate your standards, right? The old story cannot keep taking up the space. It cannot keep sitting at the fucking boardroom making every decision about your future. If it does, you're never going to get anywhere. Your past cannot define you. At some point, it has to lose its vote. And I think this is where people get so flustered and frustrated. It's like you can feel it. You want better. You want more. You've done the work. You've journaled on this. You've healed this. You understand exactly where it comes from, and you've done the shadow work, and you've gone deep, and which is incredible, and it's amazing, and it's part of the process. But understanding the old story is not the same thing as no longer organizing your life around it. Understanding the old story is not the same thing as no longer organizing your life around it. You can intellectually understand that you have a pattern. You can still keep living from that pattern, right? You can understand your little twicks and things that trigger you, and you can stay in that. You can stay tolerating that, right? You can know exactly why you overwork. And guess what? You still overwork, You can know exactly why you fear abandonment, where it came from, and still choose people that are unavailable, right? You can know exactly why money feels unsafe to you and still contract every time more arrives for you. Awareness matters, absolutely. But awareness without a new normal, without a new default setting, without a new baseline, without a new set point, becomes a very sophisticated explanation for why you keep returning to the same fucking place. And it brings me to what I call the return point, right? I think all of us have one. We do. We all have a setting. I've explained this many times. A level of receiving that we have, a level of love that we can tolerate, a level of success that we feel comfortable with, a level of visibility that we allow for ourselves, right? A level of support that we allow in. It feels familiar enough that our identity knows how to operate there. It knows what to expect there, right? And we can absolutely stretch beyond that. We can create a peak. We can hit a new milestone. We can have a breakthrough, experience this extraordinary month, let's say. But if our internal return point has not moved at all, we're going to find our way back to that familiar. Okay? This is why extraordinary results alone don't necessarily create this extraordinary life. A peak experience is not a new baseline, basically. You can touch more, you can want more, you can feel it, but also at the same time, not become the woman who lives there. You can have a huge month and still be calibrated, still be locked into a scarcity mindset. You can meet someone wonderful and still be calibrated to this inconsistency, right? You can take an incredible holiday, an incredible vacation, and return home to a life you've built that you need to escape from, right? You can have a breakthrough. Let's say you go to a retreat and you have this incredible breakthrough. I used to see this all the time when I worked in the health and wellness industry. People would come in, they'd have these life transformations, they'd have these crazy breakthroughs, they'd be glowing from the inside out, right? 3 weeks later, they return home and, respond to life the same exact way they had been responding before the retreat. They didn't break the pattern. They didn't interrupt it. They didn't change their internal set point. They touched it. They know what it felt like. They felt good and clear in that environment, but then they went straight back to what they were familiar with. The return point stayed the exact same, and that's where it gets really interesting. And this is where it's like, I'm so much less interested in helping women create an extraordinary moment. That is not why I'm here. I'm not here to give you a high, right? Than I am in watching you actually move the fucking floor that you're standing on, move what you're tolerating, move your own ceiling, right? It's like, can this conversation, why it's so important, can this conversation about more stop being the peak? Stop being this one-off thing? Can it become your baseline? Can support stop feeling like it's a shocking thing and you feel guilty about it? Can being well paid stop feeling outrageous? Can having this spaciousness and your freedom in your day stop making you anxious? Stop making you try to fill it? Can being deeply loved for who you are, all the good, all the bad, all the shadows, all the whatever, stop feeling suspicious? Can your visibility stop requiring 3 days of recovery because you'd never held that before, right? Can a standard simply become a new standard for you instead of something you negotiate every single time someone pushes up against it? Can the life that you're currently calling extraordinary become your Tuesday? That's the shift. You can visit your next level without living there. And I don't want you visiting your next level. I want you living there and then beyond. I want you to know what it feels like that once you've been stretched, once you're at this next level, it's normal for you. When you don't need to psych yourself up for it anymore. When it's just who you fucking are. It is I am being. When your body's not screaming at you that this is too much, it's of course I'm supported at this level. Of course I'm well paid. Of course I'm deeply loved and I have this gorgeous time freedom and I have standards that I hold unapologetically. My desires matter, and guess what? I'm allowed to change my mind, right? I can have both. Of course I want more without making more wrong. There's a completely different way to move through life. And sometimes I feel like we spend so much time thinking. We spend so much time thinking about this perceived risk of changing where we are, changing our standards, changing what we tolerate, that we never calculate. We never even think about the risk of staying exactly the same. We think, what if I raise my price and nobody buys that because I don't value my own work? What if I leave and I go on this crazy adventure and I don't turn around and I regret it? What if I say what I really think and someone judges me for that? What if I book a flight and it's the wrong flight or it doesn't work out exactly as I had thought in my mind? What if I say what I really think, or what if I invest in myself and nothing changes? Okay, what if I become more visible and I ask for more and I fail, right? Fair questions, absolutely. But what about the other side of that argument? What if you don't? What if you actually spend another year making yourself smaller than the vision that was given to you, right? What if another 6 months of your life, another precious 6 months of your life goes by in the relationship that you've already outgrown 2 years ago? What if you keep undercharging for your work and it's not going to create that value because the price isn't even about you. It's about the transformation of the person. What if another opportunity passes because you were waiting to feel completely ready before you went all in? What if this book, this magic idea that you have, that you want to write down, that you want to get out, that you want to express, stays in your head? It never gets on paper. If it never gets on paper, guess what? Nobody else gets to experience your magic. If the business stays at the level that you've already outgrown, your business isn't helping other people, right? As you grow, your audience will grow, your people will grow and evolve, so you've got to evolve with it, right? What if you keep putting that trip off? What if you spend another year exhausted because somewhere along the way, exhaustion became your identity. It became normal for you. It became what you tolerated. It became how you identify. What if nothing dramatically falls apart? But at the same time, nothing really expands either. That has a cost. And I think sometimes one is more dangerous than the other. It really depends. The collective that I'm speaking to is about that soul-aligned expansion. The woman that really wants more, not just wants more, but is taking action towards more, toward her evolution and her expansion, It's like the one of not moving, staying familiar, sometimes doesn't necessarily hurt all at once, to make us move. But it's quieter, and it's like the slow cost of knowing that there's more inside you and you're not even tapping into it. Not even that you're not tapping into it, you're not even trying to tap into it. You're repeatedly choosing with this awareness, you're repeatedly choosing to have lower standards. You're repeatedly choosing to be beneath it. You're repeatedly choosing to say no to your soul. It's like these tiny little compromises These little negotiations that you have in your head with your ego, with the brain, right? With the logical mind, that maybe later, when things calm down, this is probably as good as it gets. I should just be grateful, until suddenly you look around and you realize you have become incredibly skilled at tolerating a life that doesn't actually match the soul inside you, does not match the woman inside you, okay? Fuck that. I'm sorry. Not because your current life is wrong, okay? Because you shouldn't appreciate, and not because you shouldn't appreciate everything you created. I think where you're at is probably perfect. But because you know in your soul, and only you know this, I can't answer this for you. You know when something has become too small for you. You know it. You can argue with me all day long, but you know it. It's a feeling, right? There's a difference between gratitude and using gratitude to convince yourself not to expand, right? There's a difference between peace and settling. There's a difference between contentment and abandoning a desire because you're too afraid of what answering it would require from you. And I think your body 1000% knows the difference. Mine speaks to me very loud and clear when I try to, anytime I negotiate with myself, anytime my intuition's loud and my mind gets louder and I try to take a different path, it doesn't allow it. Sometimes this shows up as like literal physical ailments, like literal physical issues. Sometimes it's just this anxious feeling I have inside that it's like I'm not releasing something because I'm not going in the right direction, right? And this is what happens on the other side of that. Now, I want you to take this on the other side here. Imagine receiving support and not immediately feeling like you owe somebody something, right? Imagine you've got money coming in, you've got money flowing in, and your first thought isn't, how long until this disappears? How long will this last? Imagine holding this standard for yourself without spending 3 days wondering, was it too much? Was I too much? Should I not have said that? Imagine resting without needing to earn it through depletion and exhaustion and burnout. Imagine being seen without making yourself smaller afterwards. Imagine your business expanding without automatically believing expansion means more work or more pressure or more sacrifice. I want you to imagine deeply, deeply, deeply loving your life and still having the audacity to want more. Imagine there being no internal war between your gratitude and where you are present day and the desire that you're reaching for, between who you are and who you are becoming, between the life you've built and the life that's calling you forward at the same time. Imagine more, no longer feeling like some distant destination that you occasionally touch, that you occasionally feel. It's just how you live. It's not like, this is the conversation that I'm so obsessed with. It's not chasing. This is not a forceful thing. This is not about chasing more. It's becoming unavailable for a life less than where your standards are going, where your evolution is, where your soul's heading. Becoming available for a level of life that once used to feel outrageous until it doesn't, right? This is how it works. Until you look around and you realize this is everything I once prayed for. And it's Wednesday, The money that would blow your fucking mind. But you know how to hold it now, right? The boundary you once needed 3 different girlfriends to validate for you. I don't even question these things anymore. The version of me I once thought was fearless is simply just me. And I will tell you, I still feel fear at every single evolution, every single chapter, every single level, but that's the point. I don't look at it as a stop sign. This is when we know the floor is moving, right? It's like why I've created more, why this space is so powerful. Not because you need another place to consume information. I actually don't want you to consume information. What I want for you is not another 14 days of just taking notes and, ooh, I get it, and what a great perspective, and nodding along, and it's like, yeah, Fallon, yes. It's like, holy shit, this is amazing. And then what do? You return to the same patterns. You go straight back to where you were. If you've been in any of my previous containers, I'd love to know where you're at right now, right? Don't come if that's you. Don't come if you don't want change. Seriously. I mean that in a very loving way. There's enough content on the internet. There's enough information out there, especially with the internet. You can consume personal development all fucking day long for the rest of your life. This is not what that room is for. More, the art of becoming unavailable for less is for the woman who values her time, who values her life at such a deep level and values her mission, where she didn't come here to spend another year intellectually understanding the woman she could become. She wants to live as her right now. She wants to close that gap for herself. The woman who can feel that something's ready to move. She wants more. Done romanticizing this old baggage and this old story. Done making history the authority on her future. Done accepting below standard bullshit because she's accepted it for the longest time, right? It's like you're done touching, you're done just tasting your next level and crawling back to what's familiar. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to arrive fearless. You don't need to already be her, but you do need to be willing to move. You do need to be willing to change what you tolerate. You do need to be willing to want to raise your standards, right? I'm not creating a room for spectators. I'm creating a room for women who intend, who have full intentions to change the trajectory of their lives, willing to see themselves honestly, who are willing to be challenged, who are willing to get up against that edge and keep stretching, who are willing to stop negotiating with the standard that they know they've already outgrown, right? Women who hear more and they don't freak out. They think, how much more do I have to do? They think, how much more of myself am I willing to allow, right? That's who this room is for. And if that's not where you are right now, that's fine. It's totally okay. If you want to just keep consuming the podcast, keep going, girl. Truly. I don't feel like the energy for this room is so different than things I've invited people to in the past. And I don't want, $22 to feel like, why would I enter this room? Because where's the value there? I want women who hear this, who resonate with this and know I'm done. I am done tolerating less. I'm done, making excuses for where I've been and where I'm going. Done consuming, done circling the same thing, done waiting for the perfect mood or season or circumstance or bank account or confidence level to magically appear before I allow myself to move in that direction. When you value your time, when you value your life, when you value your mission, another year at the same return point is so expensive. That costs you more than you realize, and more, as you know, is open right now for the ridiculous opening week price of $22. That is it. If this is for you, I want it to be so easy for you to say yes to yourself. And as a bonus, on top of that, you get instant access to Unrealistic on Purpose, which is one of my many little magical portals that I love just to get you in the right energy and that champagne frequency. At the end of this week, the price doubles. Okay? It will continue to grow as the room grows, as the value grows, as it gets closer to this initiation. I am so done negotiating and tolerating any less than. I can only show you by example, right? I'm done making something smaller and keeping it free for everyone, just so it feels easy for everyone to enter. I don't want everyone to enter. That's the difference. I'm done believing that access means I've got to undervalue things, done diluting my own signal. I don't need everybody in this room. I want the right women in this room, and that is such a different energy. The woman who understands that they're not buying 14 days of content, 14 days of something to consume, and then go back to the same shit. They're entering a space because they intend to move, and this is their initiation. This is the amplifier, And the women who do move early, yeah, they get rewarded for moving because I value that. It's simple. So maybe the question isn't actually whether or not you want more. I think you already know that answer. I think it's very loud and clear that you do. Maybe the question is, how much longer are you willing to normalize less? How much longer does the old story get to stop making your decisions? How much longer does familiarity get to stop masquerading your own truth? And how much longer do you want to stand at the edge of the life you can feel and negotiate with yourself about whether or not you're allowed to step into it? At some point, there is a line that you have to draw for yourself in the sand. On one side, it's like, this is how I've always done it. This is what's realistic to me. This is what's familiar to me. This is what I'm used to. This is fine. And on the other side of that line, it's, this may be what I have known, but is not what I get to keep choosing. I fully fucking believe in more in every aspect of your life. More wealth, more health, more support, more love, more expression, adventure, ease, impact, truth. More of the woman who is underneath all the shit that you've been conditioned to normalize. If you value your time and your life and your mission, and you are so ready to stop, so ready to just stop consuming this idea of transformation, the doors are open. Opening a week for more is open. I open them on Monday. It is Wednesday, August 12th. We start August 31st, okay? You can DM me more on Instagram at fallonmichaela.co. Whether you're seeing this on YouTube or on Spotify, jump into my DMs, have a no pressure conversation. I'm happy to give you the information, and you can decide whether you want more, whether you're gonna enter this room or not. Like I said, $22 during this opening week. Price doubles at the end of the week. Unrealistic on purpose is included if you're a past client of mine. I have other things up my sleeve. You already know whether this room is for you, okay? So I'm gonna love and leave you there. DM me more on Instagram. I'm happy to give you all of that information. I'm gonna love and leave you there. Get self-sourced, give increase to the world, and live unbound.